Are you ready to take your message, your business, and your life to the next level?
Want to learn from someone with more than a decade of experience, training tens of thousands of people from all around the world?
Hi, Cliff. This is Pauline from Auckland, New Zealand.
John from Calgary, Alberta.
Amy Porterfield.
Michael Hyatt.
Dan here from Dunedin, New Zealand.
Ray Edwards. Mark Mason. Mike Stelzner.
Pat from Smart Passive Income.
It's Darren from Melbourne, Australia.
Now is the time to live the life of your dreams and do the work you feel most called to do in the world.
Welcome to the Cliff Ravenscraft Show.
Here's your host, Cliff Ravenscraft.
That's right, my friends. Welcome to episode number 548 of the Cliff Ravenscraft Show. And in today's episode, I'm going to take a little bit of a different approach to what I want to share. In fact, I want to share with you a story about how I met Chris Pavone, and what I really want to share with you is why I feel so drawn to Chris as a person, his journey that he is on, and his brand, and basically how the Chris Pavone Show has become my favorite podcast to listen to every single week. And I know that that's a shock to a few of my friends who have been in that top position before, and I still listen to those shows. No offense to my great friends Ray Edwards, Dan Miller, and all the other folks that I have very close personal relationships to. But from time to time in seasons of my life, there are different podcasts that seem to quote unquote rise to the top in my ranking of my own, of what how I approach the podcast that I'm listening to. All of the names, that Dan Miller, Ray Edwards, and Chris Pavone, those three guys, I listen to every single episode that they produce, and I listen to all of their shows every single week. Now, when I say top ranked, and what does that mean actually? Do I actually think that Chris's show is better than Dan's or Ray's and all that stuff? That's not what I'm talking about. But what I am talking about is that if Dan, Ray, or Chris Pavone, if all three of them had a show in my podcast app that I have not yet listened to, the question is, which one am I currently going to turn on first? Which one am I going to listen to in that order, in chronological order? Which one am I going to listen to? And right now, I got to tell you, I'm drawn to the Chris Pavone Show. And I've been asking myself this question. Why? Because I've shared this with Chris, and I've actually talked about it in some of my other social media postings, and I've been promoting Chris to a lot of other people, and there's a lot of reasons for that. And I believe there's a reason for me to share this story with you today. In fact, it has a lot to do with the title of this week's episode, which is a little bit of it's almost like a clickbait to get your attention, admittedly. The title of this week's episode is Don't Waste Your Money on Advertising. One method for growing your audience. And you see, through all of these years of doing podcast coaching, and now that I'm doing business mentoring and stuff like that, and when I was doing podcast coaching, it was always like, hey, Cliff, I've been podcasting for X number of months or X number of years, and I have this many subscribers. How do I get my next 1,000? How do I get my next 5,000? How do I get my next 10,000? How do I break through to the next level when it comes to gaining people's attention and getting them to subscribe to my content? That's what it used to be. And now it's, hey, I've got these products and services, and yeah, I've sold a couple of these tutorials. I've got a couple coaching clients, but man, how do I grow my list? How do I attract more customers? So it's the same thing. How do I grow my audience? And one interesting thing that may shock some people is the fact that in all of the years of me doing my business, I have not yet, to this day, spent a single penny on advertising. Now, I want to state for the record that I am not opposed to advertising. And in fact, I am absolutely certain that I am probably just beyond where I need to be so that I could actually effectively create an advertising and promotion campaign so that I could start benefiting from paid advertising. but I've just not needed it at this point. And again, I'm not suggesting that you need to wait till 10 years like I have. I've actually, is it 10? 10 years since I've been, 10 and a half years now that I've been doing this full-time self-employed business that is extremely profitable today. And I've just not needed it. But knowing what I know today and going about things the way that I've gone about them, I could see somebody who is just starting their own self-employed business lifestyle, and I could see you potentially getting into a good paid advertising marketing campaign for your business within the first 6 months, or maybe even within the first 3 months. So I want you to hear me out and say, I am not telling you that paid advertising is a waste of money. Instead, the title of the episode is if you're going to spend money on paid advertising, don't waste it. So what do I mean by that? And what I mean by this is that if your content, for example, your podcast, is not all that noteworthy, or if your products and services aren't the bomb, or if they're not absolutely blowing people away with extreme value, then all the paid advertising in the world to grow your mailing list, to sell your products and services, to get more subscribers, the only thing is paid advertisement will generate traffic. And it may get some people, if you have a paid advertising campaign that has this method of getting people to go at least check out your podcast and hit the subscribe button, those are a little bit more challenging than going to maybe your sales page for a product or service you have and getting them to click the buy now button. That's probably a little easier to do. And it's possible some people even do have the whole paid advertising campaign that leads people to a landing page that gets people to opt into your free whatever it is for your mailing list, and those can be quite effective. I've seen a variation of all three of those work for paid advertising. But the thing is if somebody sees your paid ad and you've piqued their interest, you've gained their attention, and they go and they subscribe to your podcast, but when they listen to your content, it's not all that appealing, then they may stick around for a few minutes. They may even stick around. They may even give you an episode or two that they'll listen to. But if your content or whatever, if you're not compelling enough in what you're giving them, if the value is not enough, that paid advertising was a waste of money because those people are not going to stick around. Same thing. If you give them a valuable free gift, a lot of people might take your valuable free gift, but if your follow-up in the ongoing email communication beyond the free gift, or if the free gift itself was a dud, people are going to unsubscribe from your mailing list. And so therefore your paid advertising may just be a waste of money. And of course, your products or service, you get the idea. That's what I'm saying here. So I'm not against paid advertising. I'm just saying before you pay for advertising, make sure that what you have to offer is awesome. And that's really the message here. To work on being awesome before you go around start paying advertising. But I say, so don't wait. That's the explanation of don't waste your money on paid advertising. Again, it's not saying don't do paid advertising. It just don't waste your money. Make sure that if you're doing paid advertising, it's going to be a valuable investment and that you will be able to see a return on. And I want to share with you one method. Now, I have lots of methods. In fact, at the Next Level workshop that I do here for building an online business, I have an entire session on tips for attracting your ideal customer, aka growing your audience, if you want to call it that. But I prefer to call it attracting your ideal customer. And one of the strategies, the tactics that I teach is this quote that I came up with. And it is actually a quote that's original to me. And that quote is this: be someone or do something worth talking about? You see, if I think back, how is it that I've been able to grow my audience? What is it that has drawn people to me and what I'm doing? And I don't mean to sound arrogant, but I do believe that it has a lot to do with the fact that I have been doing something since the early days of my podcasting journey. So for me, what drew people in, I was doing something worth talking about. I was spending hours on this podcast devoted to the TV show Lost, and that got people's attention. And it wasn't just, a little bit of research. I was spending hours every single week, countless number of hours actually, preparing the outlines for every single episode of that podcast. And the amount of information and insight about this show added to everyone's enjoyment. And so I was doing something worth talking about. But there was something else to it. It wasn't just doing something. And there's been a couple things. For example, another thing that I did was after a year and a half, I had created so much content and had built such an audience around so many various different topics. And people were begging me to teach them how to podcast and begging me to allow them to pay me. They was like, Cliff, please let me pay you for what you've done. You don't understand how much value you've just brought to me. And it started to get me to thinking, okay, maybe I could charge for this. And I started charging. And after a year and a half, I made the decision. Well, my wife made it for me. She's like, Cliff, you have to go in and quit your job. You have to do this full time. And that's the whole story. Many of you already know the story of how that happened. But once again, I did something worth talking about. And that did something was I have this very lucrative, very successful, extremely secure career as an insurance agent. At that time, I'd been working there for 12 years. It was owned, the insurance agency was an independently owned insurance agency owned by my mom and dad. I worked in the family business, and my family had owned this business since 1937, and I was the next in line to take it over. My wife was a stay-at-home mom. We had 3 very young children. And here I am, just months after announcing that we are finally, completely, as a result of the Dave Ramsey plan, we are now successfully debt-free except for our mortgage. And here I come out of nowhere saying, hey guys, I've made the decision. I'm going in and I'm putting my 90-day notice in. I'm leaving my career as an insurance agent, and I am going to figure out how to make this work where I'm able to do what I feel most called to do in this world. And so that was worth talking about. I figure everybody likes a story. Everybody loves a great success story, a hero's journey, if you will. But also, everybody loves a train wreck. So I was guaranteed to be either a success story or a train wreck, and people were willing to tune in every single week, and they were drawn to what is Cliff up to today? What's the next step for Cliff? What's going on in his journey? And so that drew people in. There's so many different areas of my life where I was consistently doing new, crazy things. I mean, my entire journey is filled with those, but I don't want to focus all of it on me. I will just also say that I do believe there's a lot about who I am and the way that I approach relationships with people, the way that I approach my business, the way that I want to serve, desire to help people, the level of care and empathy that I have for every person that is in my community that I have the opportunity to connect with in any way, shape, or form. There's something about who I am that has got people's interest peaked as well. And not only just piqued their interest, but they're telling other people. It's like, oh my gosh, it's not, did you hear what Cliff Ravenscraft is doing? He and his wife are inviting people onto a community cruise. They're going on a Disney cruise together. That's another thing that I did that was worth talking about, that led to some pretty amazing things in my business journey, and incredible things. That's not the focus of this episode. But I noticed there were so many times, it's like, man, Cliff Ravenscraft, have you ever interacted with him? It's like, I've heard, or actually it's more like, hey, I've heard there's a couple different people I could go to for podcasting. There's this person, and I've seen the conversations in online discussion forums over the years where other people, without any prompting from me, I just watch the conversation, and I've seen people say, man, technically speaking, all three of those individuals could definitely help you. But here's why I highly endorse and recommend Cliff Ravenscraft. And it's for this reason, this reason, and this reason. And it had nothing to do with my technical skill. It had to do with who I was as a person and how I treat people and how I make people feel. And so a lot of the reason why, for me, up to this point, 10 years later in my business, while I could definitely benefit from paid advertising, and it would certainly pour the fuel on this fire of awesomeness that's going on in my business. And quite frankly, it's on my list of things to do to reach out to somebody who's well experienced in the Facebook advertising space and maybe the Google advertising space, and using some paid advertising to generate more exposure for the Free the Dream conference, for sure. That's definitely something that's on my roadmap. But yet, even without that, I've already sold more than $30,000 worth of tickets to the Free the Dream conference, and I've not paid a single penny for advertising, and the conference isn't until September. So how does that happen? And I honestly believe it has it's all of the different strategies, all of the different things that I share in the Next Level workshop. But I can tell you more than any of the other ones, it's do something or be someone worth talking about. And that's why today I actually want to share with you and take the focus off of me. And I want to focus the rest of this episode giving you someone I believe is a perfect example of this strategy, this technique for marketing and gaining attention of people and growing your audience without actually having to pay anything for advertising, without aggressively marketing and selling yourself. And that is Chris Pavone. Chris Pavone is somebody who I have noticed has done so many things that are worth talking about, which I'm going to do a lot of talking about those things here. And more importantly, Chris Pavone is someone, without actually doing anything, he's just someone worth talking about as well. And that's why I'm going to talk about why I feel that way about him. So I want to share with you today, it's all about Chris Pavone, but it's not just about Chris Pavone. It's about this idea of doing something or being someone worth talking about. And I want to invite you to see how you can put yourself in the role of a Chris Pavone. All right? Is there anything about you, what you're doing, or who you are that can make you this worth talking about? All right. So with all of that, I was at the gym this morning for 2 hours, which is very standard for me. And while I was at the gym, I took out my phone and I was just typing in a bunch of bullet point items of things that I wanted to share with you. And I'm hopefully this will come out really well. I did not prepare this ahead of time as far as practicing it, but I just want to share with you the bullet point list here. So the first thing I have here is that Chris Pavone is a master at making his dreams come true. This is one of the reasons why I personally love following Chris Pavone on social media, on Facebook and Instagram. It's why I love tuning in to every single episode of the Chris Pavone Show, the podcast. It's why I love interacting with Chris Pavone via text messaging on a pretty consistent basis. I'd say Chris Pavone and I text each other at least 4 to 15 times a week. And though each of those times are really long, we converse back and forth via text messages quite a bit. But what draws me to him is the fact that I just love the fact that Chris Pavone is somebody who is a master of making his dreams come true. I see so much of myself in him, and I'm drawn to the great qualities in him that remind me of when I first started, when I first got into this space of creating online content and wanting to have a powerful and positive and profound impact in people's lives. And I see so much of Chris Pavone's desire to do that, and his matched up with the fact that he, even before I ever met him, had already become a master at making his dreams come true. Meaning that for Chris Pavone, starting right out of the gate, he's already got some experience that one-ups what I had when I first started. So what am I talking about? Well, first of all, let me tell you, Chris Pavone is a former pro wrestler for the WWE, which I think is World Wrestling Entertainment or whatever. But when I was a kid, it was the WWF. And when Chris Pavone was a kid, it was the WWF. But from by the way, everything here is from my perspective. I'm telling you the Chris Pavone story from my perspective without actually giving it tons and tons of thought. But what I will tell you is this morning I was texting with Chris, and we did a phone call because I told him I was going to do an entire podcast episode about him. And I asked him if he would tell the story of how we met in a lunch conversation that we had at Chipotle from his perspective, and he did that for me. He's emailed it to me, and I have not read it yet. And I'm going to tell you my side of the story, and then I'm going to read what Chris wrote to me today to share his side of the story of how we met and in this path and this journey. So anyway, Chris, first of all, I want to tell you that I met Chris for the very first time in 2017, so just last year. It may have actually been about a year ago. It was at Ray Edwards Copywriting Academy conference in Franklin, Tennessee. I didn't go there because I was invited to speak, although I am speaking at Ray's event here in August coming up in this year, or actually in July. I have to look at that date. I'll get that to you soon. Anyway, but I went down to Ray's event, and I just wanted to hang out with Ray. I wanted to encourage and inspire anybody I could meet there. I just felt this desire to connect with people. Anybody that was in Ray's community that is drawn to Ray and his message, I just know that that's quality. It's such a quality community. And I just wanted to go down there and support my friend Ray. And I wanted to be of value to anybody that was in his community. I figure if I could if I personally could add value to the lives of people that attended Ray's event, that any value I added to their lives, that Ray would benefit from the fact that it made each of those people that I added value to, it made their return on investment even greater, so that they were even more excited about the fact that they invested in their time and resources to go to Ray's event. That's why I went to Ray's event last year. All right. So I went there and I met, Ray gave me a VIP ticket to sit up front and be a part of that VIP community. And there at the event, I met Chris Pavone. And that's where I learned for the very first time that Chris Pavone is this former professional wrestler for the WWE. All right. Now, I can't remember why, but I do remember that I was so drawn to Chris. There was a little bit of charisma in who he is. Just, you could tell he's a genuine, authentic, caring person. If you talk to Chris Pavone for any more than 90 seconds, I promise you will, number one, feel listened to. You will feel that he cares about anything and everything you have to say. You could just tell when Chris Pavone is listening to you and you're speaking, he's not right then and there thinking about what is he going to say next. He is laser targeted, focused on everything you're saying, and you just feel that he cares. And I was drawn to that. But also, you could just tell that this is a guy who has achieved success and is he's going places, he's gone places, and he's going places. And for whatever reason, just through a brief conversation with him, I'm like, dude, I'd love to take you out to lunch. Would you be interested in going out to lunch? And of course, he said, sure. And so we went out to Chipotle and sat there and had lunch. And that's when I learned about how he became a pro wrestler. And we talked for a little bit, and he tells me about the fact that, as a kid, he dreamed of becoming a pro wrestler for the WWF, or now the WWE. And just the fact that this was a dream of Chris Pavone as a kid watching television. Imagine this. Imagine the people that heard Chris tell people his dream of becoming a pro wrestler and being on television and all of that stuff. How many people do you imagine kind of laughed that off? A couple episodes ago, I talked about in an episode, I think it was an interview I did with Jeff Long. Jeff and I were talking about this idea of why do people give up on their dreams? Or maybe it wasn't Jeff, maybe it was somebody else. But this idea of why do people give up on their dreams? And it's because they don't believe that they can do it, because so many people have told them that's not responsible, or whatever the case may be. And we talked about the fact that in elementary school, they have these graduation ceremonies for fifth graders or whatever before they're promoted up to middle school. And at these elementary school graduation ceremonies, many times kids are asked to get up on stage and just say, hey, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I talked about the fact that I've been to a couple of these, and I've heard more than one little girl say, I want to be a mermaid. And everybody breaks out laughing. But I questioned, why is that so funny? I mean, why do people laugh? And you can imagine it's like, I didn't talk to Chris, and I doubt that I doubt that I don't know, maybe he did. Maybe I should ask Chris. But just could you imagine Chris Pavone getting up there and say, as a fifth grader graduating elementary school, and they say, Chris Pavone, what do you want to be when you grow up? I'm going to be a professional wrestler on television. And I'm like, yeah, good for you, Chris. And you guys, you could just imagine if that were the case, that there would be some chuckles in the crowd. It's like, yep, that's just as likely as the little girl mermaid, right? But you know what? Chris set his heart on the fact that it was his dream, it was his outcome. He knew what he wanted. He wanted to be a pro wrestler. And this is a dream that he never gave up on, regardless of anybody who may have jokingly laughed it off, or maybe even suggested that, well, a lot of people have that dream, but very few people actually get to live that out as a part of their actual career. And regardless of what anybody may have said, Chris Pavone turned his dream of becoming a professional pro wrestler into a reality. He actually became a bona fide celebrity. In fact, on television, on YouTube, you can actually go and do a search for Chris Pavone. That's Chris with a K, by the way. Chris Pavone, and you will find like old WWE videos, television broadcast of Chris actually wrestling. And of course, if you look up his other wrestling, I think he had two different wrestling names. One was Croft Daddy, and I think in the earlier days he had another name as well. And if you search under those keywords, you'll even find more footage of Chris Pavone when he was on television as a WWE wrestling celebrity. And I don't throw the word celebrity around lightly. I mean, there was an MTV television game show. So an MTV game show where they had celebrities on this game show. I can't remember what it was. It's something about in a library and everybody had to be quiet, but they do these insane, funny, crazy stuff. But only celebrities are invited onto this MTV game show. And there's an episode that you can watch the entire thing on YouTube, and it's Chris Pavone and a couple of his fellow wrestling celebrities from the WWE Chris Pavone as a celebrity on a celebrity game show on MTV. So he is a bona fide television celebrity and WWE celebrity. And he's never done this in a boastful way. But I happen to know that if there are some very huge names in the world of wrestling and bodybuilding and all of that stuff. Some very huge, like, not just like, I'm not into the WWE, right? But there are some people like John Cena and some other names out there. There are some other people that Chris just happens to know. I mean, it's just like this is a guy. It's like, but with all of that, I love, number one, that Chris never gave up as a kid becoming a celebrity in the WWE and wrestling. But I also love the amount of authenticity, humility, and transparency that Chris has about the whole process. And number one, authenticity. Chris is authentic to the core. I mean, this guy will tell you the truth. Even if it's embarrassing to him, he tells you the truth. Matter of fact, it's one of the things that I love about his podcast. He has this segment on his show every week called Happy Wife, Happy Life. And he's always telling stories about how he screws up as a husband. Not all the time, but when he does screw up, he's like, oh man, I had this initial reaction. And he says the things that, as husbands, we all kind of have in our own minds and our thoughts, but would we really actually say out loud that we ever had those thoughts? Probably not. But I get it because I'm one of those guys as well. He's transparent to the core. He's authentic. It's just, you get the real deal when you go around Chris or you listen to a show. You get that. But you also get this humility. He's like, dude, man, this is how I did it and stuff like that. He's never arrogant. He's never boastful. But yet at the same time, he's very confident. And I love the balance of humility versus his confidence, and it's incredible. All right, talking about authenticity and humility. His story, if you listen to his podcast, by the way, I encourage every single person listening to my voice, if you want to see somebody on a road to success in making their dreams become a reality, go search for the Chris Pavone Show. That's KRISPAVONE. The Chris Pavone Show. Subscribe to his podcast. Go all the way back to the first episode and listen to them in order because it is worth your time. And I've not missed a single episode of the Chris Pavone Show since he launched it. And I'm pulling it up here in my app. I'm using Pocket Cast these days. And I'm looking for Chris. He's at the top of my list. And he just published episode 43. So I've listened to all 43 weekly episodes since he's launched the podcast. And they're all amazing. And I encourage you to listen to them because you will hear Chris tell stories about how he actually became a pro wrestler. You will hear stories about how he got fired from the WWE and why he got fired. You also learn how he got rehired when they told him that would probably be impossible. You'll learn how when it came time to, you don't stay in the WWE forever, and when it came time for him in the next season of life, you'll hear the story of how Chris had a dream of becoming how he became he had a dream of becoming a teacher. So he like, what do I do next? He's like, well, I want to become a teacher. I'd like to teach children as a teacher in a school. But he didn't have the qualifications. He didn't have the education. But yet that was a dream of his, and he didn't let it stop him. I'm not going to give you any of the details, but if you listen through all of the episodes, you'll hear the steps that he took, and you'll hear how his research led him to the next step, to the next step, to the next step, and how he became an elementary school teacher. And you'll also learn about Chris's other habits. One of the things not his other habits, his other passions in life. I love the fact that Chris is a well-rounded person. I mean, he's got an awesome wife that he absolutely loves. He's got this experience of having a dream as a kid and making it become a reality, against all odds that you could imagine. He made it a reality. Decides he wants to become this teacher. He's having an impact. He has a love for art. He's working on the side. He does his elementary school teaching job. He does this painting class at this place called Painting with a Twist, helping people out there in the world, just average Joes like me. You could take a class and have no experience in painting, but he can actually, through one evening, help you paint an image. It's incredible. And so that's a passion of his. Working out is still a passion for his. So strength training, keeping up his physique, his muscle mass and stuff like that. That's a pretty big deal for Chris. And of course I'm drawn to that kind of thing as I'm, becoming the master, actually being the master of my physical body is a very huge passion of my own. Now, here's the other thing. Chris has another passion, which is the Cleveland Browns football team. And they're not the greatest team out there. In fact, they're one of the worst. And I don't know anything about football, but I just know, at least I know enough to know that. And I'm not saying anything that's going to offend any Cleveland Brown fan, because from what I know about it, everybody who's a Cleveland Browns football fan knows that they're one of the worst teams out there. And I love hearing Chris talk about why he's a Cleveland Browns fan and why he still loves that team today. And even though I have zero interest, I have absolutely no interest in football whatsoever. I watch the Super Bowl every year, but for most years I actually watched it for the football or for the ads. And I actually have, over the last couple years, I kind of got into the game itself. I understand football. I just have zero interest. It's just not a passion of mine. But I love to hear Chris talk about it. And why do I love to hear Chris talk about the Cleveland Browns or football or anything else that Chris is interested in that isn't necessarily interesting to me personally? It's because Chris Pavone is interesting to me. See, Chris Pavone is someone worth talking about. So Chris Pavone is someone worthy of my time, effort, and energy. Chris Pavone is somebody that I look forward to tuning in and hearing what is going on and what is going through the mind of Chris Pavone. What motivates Chris Pavone? What drives him? What actually is what is he doing today? What is he thinking today? What is it that interests him? What is it that drives him? And I find myself compelled to learn more about Chris Pavone, which, by the way, I want you to understand, I believe that a majority of you listening to my voice today, if you've been listening to me for more than 2 or 3 months, my guess is that everything I'm saying about Chris, you would probably say about me. That there are things that you follow me for because you're interested. What is Cliff thinking today? What's going through Cliff's mind? It's not all of the technical, it's not all the help, it's not all the how-to information, but it's just me. You're drawn to me. And I only say that with confidence because I've heard it from so many of you, and I just know this. And so for me to talk about Chris Pavone is a way for me to talk about this whole thing about do something or be someone worth talking about without it being all about me. I love the fact that I can tell you how all of this is applying, why I'm drawn to Chris Pavone, and why I believe you would be drawn to Chris Pavone as well if you knew about him. Because he's worth talking about. He does things worth talking about. And I'm here talking about them. Not only, so he's got a passion of working out, he's got this passion of the Cleveland Browns, he's got a passion for art, he's also got a passion for trains, model railroading. In fact, I happen to know that if I'm not mistaken, I'm almost positive that it is in Chris's wedding vows with his wife. His wife, in her wedding vows, I believe, inserted a clause that there will always be a room for your trains. You know, I somewhat remember that actually slipping out either in a conversation that he and I personally had, or it was in a podcast episode. I don't remember which one, but I'm about 98.5% positive that Rachel's wedding vow included there'll always be a room for your trains in our house. And the thing is, I'm interested in Chris's passion for model railroading. When Chris talks about the store that he goes to and the amount of time that he spends there and the conversation he has with the owner and stuff like that, I love hearing about that because I love hearing what draws me to that is Chris isn't just about the money. He's not just about his career. He's not just about the job, the work. Chris actually is invested in doing things that for his own recreation, for his own enjoyment. He invests in his toys. And I love that. And it reminds me that I need to stay vigilant about remaining investing in my own recreation, in my own toys, in my own enjoyment, and that it's okay. And not only is it okay, it's necessary. So I find myself just intrigued about Anyway, so here's what I will tell you is that I went to lunch after just meeting Chris, probably had no more than a 10 or 15 minute conversation, but I can just tell you right out of the gate, instantly, I'm like, I'd like to get to know this guy more. I don't know what it was, but I just felt drawn to invite him to lunch. So I invite him out to lunch. And so we're sitting there at Chipotle and we're having a lunch conversation. And through this conversation, I get to hear a little bit of a backstory about how he became a pro wrestler. That was intriguing to me. Then how he became an art teacher. And he mentioned a little bit about what drew him to come to Ray's conference and the fact that he's actually trying to build a little bit more of an online business, that now that he's a teacher, he's thinking about the fact that, I might want to do something beyond my teaching. I feel like there's this next season of my life is what I remember him telling me. And at the time, I believe he was working on an online presence to promote his own art. He thought that maybe his art would be his business, and his art. He had a website. He had some comic books that he actually did the artwork that were coloring books that you could fill in. You could go in and color, but it was his artwork, and I believe it was Visual Something Works, but Visual Faith Works, something like that. But it was a crossover between Chris's faith, and he's a Christian, and so he's got this very strong faith background, and he wanted to mix the faith with art and encourage and inspire people in that way. And he's telling me about this and stuff. And he told me, and I've even created a YouTube channel and stuff. And he goes, and by the way, I'm thinking of a podcast, but I don't know where a podcast would fit in at this point. And he says, but people seem to love, when he was telling me about the podcast, he said, but people do seem to love the content that I've created for my YouTube channel. So, and I said, really, tell me about some of the content you created. And he told me about some of the different things. And one of the YouTube videos I think was called Happy Wife, Happy Life, which again, eventually became a segment on his podcast. And he said, man, and I created this video and shared this story of something I did for my wife. And people started to leave comments and it said, Chris, man, you inspire me. You motivate me. And so when he told me this story, and I'm like, and of course I started thinking instantly about my formula for building a profitable and successful online business. So he's telling me what products and services he's just thrown out to the world. It's kind of like that. Let me see what kind of product and service I can create, see if any of this gains attraction. Something like that. It gains any traction. But what the first thing I ask is, where are people already seeking your advice? Where are people already coming to you and saying, hey, this is where you're adding value to my life? And so as soon as he started to tell me about some of the comments that he was getting on his YouTube videos and how people were emailing him and asking him questions, like, have you ever thought about, doing like life coaching? It's where I'm heading next. And I don't mean to steer you or anything like that, but man, your desire to help and encourage and inspire and educate people, it seems to me like people are already drawn to this value that you're adding. It sounds to me like you're already adding value to people's lives in this way, and it's actually who you are and your message and your positivity and your inspiring words and story that's already engaging people. It's already drawing people in. And of course, I didn't mention this to him in the conversation, at least I don't think I did, but I was already sucked in. There was already something about Chris that drew me in. And I'm like, dude, imagine how many people out there are inspired about the fact that as a kid, you had a dream of doing something that so many hundreds of thousands of kids around the world had a dream of, but you're one that made it happen. And dude, you've got an inspiring story. And have you ever thought about being a life coach? And dude, if you would have just seen, if you would have just saw his face and he's like, tell me more. And I'm like, so I just shared with him what I was up to and things like that. And I can't remember the rest of the conversation, but I could just tell that a light bulb went off. I saw a different, unique sparkle in his eye. You could just tell that he was excited about something. And I could, as soon as we started talking and he heard about what is life coaching, what is this encouraging, inspiring people and coaching people, when he was hearing about that, he lit up, and he lit up a whole lot more than when he was telling me about his art website and his other stuff that he had been working on already previously up to that point. So that was our lunch conversation. Of course, the event went on for a couple more days, and we continued to touch base through session after session and stuff like that. Just slowly getting to know each other. I would say we were an acquaintance at that point, but we had exchanged phone numbers, I guess, or email, one or the other, and we stayed in touch. Now, I did not do any of this. I did not go to Ray's event because I was hoping to draw up some business, that I would network and build some relationships with people, and hopefully people would start buying my other products and services. I happen to know that happens, but that wasn't the purpose of this. It was not the purpose of inviting Chris out to lunch. I believe in my heart the reason why I invited Chris out to lunch is because I was inspired. I wanted to learn more about how this guy, as a child, had a dream that I want to learn how he didn't get talked out of it, because this is fascinating to me. I want to hear more about that story. So, but as a result of our engagement there and our ongoing stuff, he told me that he was interested in starting a podcast. And the next thing you know, I was getting ready to do. It was actually my final session of Podcasting A to Z, and one of the registrations that came in was Chris Pavone. And I'm like, wow. So here Chris Pavone just invested $2,000 into one of my products and services. Now, this is another key into how does somebody, how did I get the relationship? This is another question I get a lot. The people that are my mentors that have become my close personal friends, the fact that I'm close personal friends with Dan Miller, close personal friends with Michael Hyatt, close personal friends with Pat Flynn, close personal friends with Ray Edwards, and I could name a bunch of other names that you would recognize. But how did I develop such close personal relationships with them? And a lot of it has to do with some of the things that Chris has been doing with me. So one of the things I can tell you is that Chris started following me on social media. He started leaving me comments of positive, encouraging notes of encouragement. Hey, Cliff, great job at the gym. And I remember there was this one time where Chris had gone to the gym and afterwards he posted, "Hey, today's workout, I actually," because he was mostly doing, I believe, strength training. That was a majority of his workouts at the time, was strength training. And then all of a sudden he was following me in my journey. He was listening to my podcast every week and heard me talking about working out 6 days a week, and he's heard that story several times, and he's like, dude, hey, here on Instagram, he goes, I just want to let you guys know I did cardio for an hour today, and it was all motivated and inspired by my friend Cliff Ravenscraft, #train with Cliff. And so just little things like that would show up into my feed, and I would get notifications of that, and that got my attention. He was consistently leaving me comments. He would drop me emails saying, hey, I listened to this week's episode, and that was an encouraging thing. Thank you for that, man. And I'm thinking about signing up for your course. And so he signs up, and then he invests into one of my high-priced products, right? Podcasting A to Z. So instantly, it's like, wow, okay, This I didn't anticipate him being a paid customer, and if so, not so quickly. But this is so awesome. I'm thrilled to know that one of my students is going to be Chris Pavone, and so I get this opportunity to go much deeper. I became his personal coach for 4 full weeks. And that's where I really got to go deep into this relationship with Chris. And I really invested in him. And he is a star student. He is one of those guys that when you say something, he's going to take action on it. This guy does not play around. You know, I've met people who tell me, Cliff, I want to create a podcast. And, you know, they've been working on the launch of their podcast for 9 months and they haven't yet launched their podcast yet. You know, and they have their reasons for not launching yet, but they're just reasons. But Chris Pavone is a guy who's like, dude, if you tell me that I need to launch my podcast by the 3rd week of this course, I'm launching my podcast by the 3rd week of this course. I don't remember if I told him he needed to, and that's when he launched. But all I know is that Chris Pavone had his podcast up and running either during the 4 weeks of that course or it was immediately afterward. I can't remember. But I will tell you, Chris Pavone took action. And not only that, but Chris Pavone paid attention to every single solitary piece of advice that I gave him. The audio quality of his show is top notch. The consistency of his show is top notch. The quality of his content is top notch. The authenticity, the stories that he shares, the way that he shares. He's followed every single piece of advice that I've ever given him, and his show is amazing. The Chris Pavone Show. If you haven't stopped already or pulled up your search part in your app, go Chris Pavone. Look for it. KRISPAVONE. Go back to the first episode. And here's the thing. It's gotten better week after week after week after week. It's a dose of positivity, encouragement, motivation, inspiration to go after your dreams, to live the life for which you were created. That's the message of Chris Pavone. Does that sound familiar to you? Well, it might, because why am I so drawn to Chris? Because he shares a similar passion for what we want to do in the world. And if you're listening to me, which I know a majority of you are drawn to what I'm doing, and you want to be able to do this in the world as well. And so if you like my show, and if you love my show, then you're going to like and probably love the Chris Pavone Show as well. It will. The only thing I'm concerned about is that you actually might, if Chris puts out an episode and I put it out an episode around the same time, and there's we each have one unlistened episode you haven't listened to yet. My only concern is that you might start listening to his show before mine. But if you do, that's cool, because Chris deserves it. He's worthy of your attention. He's worth me talking about. Chris Pavone is someone that is worth talking about, and he is always doing things worth talking about. So, and by the way, what are some of the things that Chris has done that's worth talking about? Number one, he had a dream as a kid about being a celebrity. Well, he didn't say celebrity. Just about being a wrestler for the WWE. All right. But we know that as a kid, just like, man, wouldn't it be cool to be on television? He did it. All right. Now, after that, he had a desire to become a teacher when he wasn't qualified to be a teacher. But guess what? He did it. All right. And then all these other things in life, and I'm not going to give them all away, but there's other things that he's done. And then he wanted to do a podcast, and he did it. And he followed all of the advice, and he invested in the right equipment, the right education, and followed it all to the core. He did it, right? So then all of a sudden he's like, okay, now I've got the podcast up and running. Now here's the thing, I'm gung ho, man. I can't stop thinking about this idea of being this life coach. But how do I go about that, Cliff? And I said, and of course, he knows that I have an entire workshop, the Next Level Workshop, Building an Online Business, which is all about building a coaching, thought leadership kind of business. And before I know it, Chris signs up for the Next Level Workshop. He invests another $2,000 into my workshop. All right, now tell me, is there any way that at this point that Chris Pavone isn't consistently on the top of my mind? Not only was I just drawn to him, his personality, just who he is, his authenticity, his transparency, his just humbleness and just awesomeness at the same time. I'm drawn to him personally. I'm drawn to his action-taking lifestyle, his just go and make it happen, his mastery of making his dreams come true. I'm drawn to that. And if you never bought a single paid product from me, I'm already drawn in and feel connected to this guy. But when he has now invested $4,000 into my products and services in under a year, that just gets your attention. And again, how do a lot of that is how I've gotten the attention of some of these other people. I go to their events. Anyway. So he signs up for the Next Level Workshop. Now, when he comes to the Next Level Workshop, I knew that he was coming, and I was so excited, just as excited as I was to be his coach for 4 weeks. I was so excited that I was going to get the opportunity to connect with him here in the Next Level studio. And during that particular workshop, I made it a point that my son, Matthew, who is 16 years old, I made it a point that he took a day off of school and got it approved for an alternative education credit or whatever. So he's in high school, but we got it approved for him to take the day off on Friday so that he could be here for this workshop, because my son said, Dad, when I graduate high school, I want to start a business. I don't know what kind of business yet, but I'd like to learn from you how to do this. And I said, why don't you come to the Next Level Workshop? So even before Chris signed up, it already been arranged that my son Matthew was coming to this session of the Next Level Workshop that Chris that was coming up. And then I saw Chris was signed up. I saw his registration come through, and I'm like, okay, I am intentionally setting Chris Pavone next to my son. And I will tell you, that was very selfish on my part, because I can tell you right now, Chris could have sat next to anyone in that, and anybody who would have sat next to Chris would have been blessed. Their socks would have been blessed off of them. You know what I'm saying? And I wanted that for my son. And I told Chris this. I shared the outline, this bullet point list I outlined with Chris today when I told him what my outline for how I was going to tell the story of how I met him and his story of why I'm drawn to him and stuff like that. And he says, dude, when I read that he goes, I wondered, if it was intentional that you put me next to your son. He goes, I just want you to know, now that I know that it is the case, I consider that a great honor. Wow. Thank you. And yeah, I did that intentionally. I wanted if there was one person there were 14 people in that session of the Next Level Workshop. If there was one person I wanted my son to sit next to, it was Chris Pavone. If that tells you anything about who Chris is as a person, that's who I wanted and you know what? To this day, my son still talks about Chris Pavone. You know why? Because Chris Pavone is someone and has done some things worth talking about. And today, my son is still jazzed about the fact that he sat next to Chris Pavone. And every time I'm texting, he's like, oh, dude, that's Chris, cool. And yeah. Anyway, so I intentionally set him next to my son. And here's the deal. I have lots of people that go through the Next Level Workshop. I have lots of people who hear the 11-step formula, and they hear about how to attract your ideal customer and grow your audience. They hear about the characteristics for success and how to apply this. They hear about all of the different steps, all 10 sessions that I teach at the Next Level Workshop. I can tell you this, Chris Pavone has implemented everything in the exact order in which I shared it. He's an action taker. He is investing in himself. He takes the information and he goes and he applies it. He does it. He puts it into action. And I love that about Chris. And so Chris comes away, he's got his action plan. I'm going to be a life coach. I'm going to start coaching people. I'm going to offer it. I'm going to get my first client. And he hears about the Next Level Workshop and he says, Cliff, dude, I'm going to tell you right now, it's my goal to become one of your next level mastermind members. I want to be I know it's $1,000 per month. Now he's on a teacher salary, right? An elementary school teacher. He's an elementary art school teacher. So he's on an elementary school teacher salary. So he's already spent a significant amount of income in 2017 for the Ray Edwards VIP conference. He's spent $2,000 on podcasting A to Z, and then he spent $2,000 on the Next Level Workshop. And so, Chris is not made of money, but the thing is he's investing himself. He says, I know this is what I want. This is my dream. I'm pursuing this. This is my outcome. I know I'm going to make it happen. And he had confidence that the Ray Edwards event was going to give him a return on his investment. I guarantee you, I promise you, he would tell you he's gotten that way more over. He knew that he would get a good return on his investment for podcasting A to Z. Guys, I'm telling you, his podcast is my favorite podcast. You need to go subscribe. Chris Pavone, what's Chris with the K? Chris Pavone Show. All right, go get it. And then he came to the Next Level Workshop and he says, I know I'm going to get a return for that. And then he's like, Cliff, I need to get my business up and running, so some income coming from my coaching side of things, because I want to tell you, then my next dream, I want to become a paid member of your Next Level Mastermind, which, by the way, is $1,000 per month. And I'm like, dude, you're going to do it. I know you are. And so I would, it's like your first thing is to get your first client. And I helped walking through the 11-step process. He was doing it. Now, because we have this relationship, I always talk about the fact that, what I have done for Chris, I wish I could do for every single person that listens to my voice, that subscribes to this podcast, all of this stuff. And I got to tell you, I can't. There's not enough time in my day to invest in everybody at the level of relationship that I invest in Chris Pavone. But I always do for some what I wish I could do for everyone. And I can tell you right now, I can't say this for sure, but Chris Pavone was probably one of those people that I would still invest heavily. I can't, okay, no, it's not the same. I would have invested in Chris heavily in a personal relationship with him, encouraging him through text messages, occasional FaceTime calls and stuff like that, just as a result of who he is, what he's done, his action, just all the things that I told you about, with the, if you take away the fact that he's invested $2,000 in A to Z, podcasting A to Z, and $2,000 into my live workshop here in the studio. So I would, but the fact that he invested so heavily, and knowing the salary that an elementary school teacher has, the fact that he's invested so heavily, it certainly has bolstered my desire to invest a little bit more into him. His investment in podcasting A to Z and the Next Level Workshop is actually a greater investment than some other people, because for some other people, their financial resources were it was an easier decision for them financially to make it than maybe it was for Chris. All right. So just thinking of all of this stuff, why am I so drawn to Chris? Why am I so consistently? But it's all of, when I think about how consistently he commented and gave me feedback and encouragement. And I remember that time when he says, Cliff, I just want to let you know, dude, I thought that I worked out a lot. But man, you are a consistent inspiration for me when it comes to physical fitness and health. I got to tell you, just that feedback, that one piece of feedback that I got from Chris Pavone, a guy who, if you see Chris, Chris can show you some photos of himself where, he can flex his muscles and it'll blow your mind, the physique that Chris has as a former pro wrestler. Okay. And for somebody like that to say, to me personally, but also to tell the world that it's Cliff Ravenscraft who's motivated me to take my health and fitness to the next level. Dude, and he's like, now I'm committed to working out 6 days a week, every week. And I'm still doing my strength training, but now I've added cardio and I'm doing this much cardio. And when I used to think about, sometimes it's a struggle, but I don't have that anymore because I learned from, it's like, dude, so that's another thing that's just drawn me to Chris, is the fact that he's let me know how much I've had. I have a desire to serve people, to change people's beliefs about who they are and help them, take their lives to the next level. And to know that I've had this impact with Chris personally through the content that I create, but then through podcasting A to Z, then through the stuff at the Next Level Workshop. I'm like, and to know that his next goal is to join my $12,000 a year Next Level Mastermind. I'm like, wow. And so do you think I'm drawn to invest in him in even a greater level? Yes. And it's not so that, oh man, what can I do to get Chris to sign up as soon as possible? The reality is right now, the Next Level Mastermind, while there still are a few spots available in the PM group of the Next Level Mastermind, there's currently a spot available in the AM group, but that's going to be filled here within the next couple of days. So, but anyway, the fact is that right now, all of my financial needs are met currently with the existing membership of the Next Level Mastermind. So it's not like I'm hurting for money or that I desperately need Chris to hurry up and get into the Next Level Mastermind, right? But man, I already felt drawn to help him. And so a couple of weeks ago, it's about 6 weeks ago, I reached out to Chris and I said, listen, you talked about it, and he's mentioned it several times. He's, dude, I'm working on this. And, I would say, hey, how's things going and getting your first coaching call? And I would do a FaceTime with him and I say, hey, have you thought about saying this? Have you thought about expressing it this way? Have you thought about this? Hey, I heard how you mentioned it in the end of the episode. Maybe you want to tweak it a little bit this way. And of course, anytime I give him advice, he immediately takes action. And as a result of those tweaks, he starts getting coaching clients. People are starting to hire him. And I'm like, dude, that's awesome. And I'm like, hey, Chris, you've mentioned several times that you'd like to become a member of the Next Level Mastermind. He says, yeah. He goes, I have a opportunity I'd like to offer you. Normally, I'm not a fan of offering anything for free. I think people need to invest in, most people, when you get something for free, they don't value it. But here's what I know about you, Chris. I know that you're a person who takes action, and you've already invested so heavily in podcasting A to Z. You've already invested heavily in the Next Level Workshop. And dude, I feel so drawn to you. I love your show. I never miss an episode. I get value from you. I'm inspired by you. And dude, I just want to offer something to you and let me know what you think. But I'd like to personally mentor you one-on-one. On a weekly basis at no charge to you. The only thing is that once we get you and your business, your coaching business, to the place where you can afford the $1,000 a month, that you join, which is what your goal is anyway. And I said, why don't you talk that over with Rachel and see? And so he did. He talked it over. He's like, dude, I'm in. And he knows that my mentoring is $1,500 an hour. So it's like, it was a no-brainer for him. His goal is, he had already stated that as soon as his business gets to the $1,000 a month of income coming in from the coaching side of things, then Chris would join the Next Level Mastermind. So the only thing is that he was already going to do that. And I knew for a fact that if I were to personally mentor him, he would get to that place much faster. I mean, I knew he would get to that place within the next 6 months, maybe, certainly within the next 12 months. But could we shortcut that for him? Could I? I'm confident I could. And if I don't, it's not a big deal. It's not what I'm doing. It's not that I want another member in the Next Level Master. Although selfishly, I want Chris Pavone in the Next Level Mastermind for no other reason than I love Chris Pavone and I'd love to engage in relationship with him for an hour, for 90 minutes every single week through a mastermind relationship. So that maybe it less motivated by an additional recurring revenue stream and more drawn to the fact that I would benefit from having Chris in my life for 90 minutes every week. So I offered to mentor him pro bono. Don't email me, ask me. I do this for some every now and then. I have the financial margin in my life that allows me to do this, but I'm very selective about who I do this for. And to date, I've never done this for anybody who asks for my services for free. So but I have a handful of people that I consistently mentor at no cost. And it's just people that I know that, man, they're in a place where if they could afford me, they would pay it without question. And right now, they're not in a place where they could afford my rates. They could afford to work with somebody else, but I want to be able to help them because I believe I can. And so again, elementary school teacher, salary. I know that Chris isn't hurting for money, but I know that he's not. It's just not. You know what I'm saying. So I'm like, dude, I want to help Chris. I want to get him to where his business in and of itself could generate the income for him to achieve that next dream, which is to become a member of the Next Level Mastermind. And then once we get him in that every single week, dude, we're going to turn the fuel. We're going to pour gasoline on what he's doing, and we're going to blow this thing up. And so I started coaching him or mentoring him on a weekly basis, with the exception of a week when Stephanie had surgery. But 6 weeks ago, and during the first call, he's like, hey, how can we get you your first coaching clients? And boom, he's got his first coaching client. Then he's got his second and then his third. And it's like, now he's got coaching clients. And then I'm like, hey, Chris, tell me, what are some of the common threads about this? And he tells me that a majority of these people that are coming to him seem to be interested in achieving their fitness goals. They're really struggling to get their fitness under control. And I'm like, so a majority of the people that are coming to you when they say, hey, can I want to hire you to be my coach to help me break through what's holding me back to achieving my dream, which my dream is to getting my health and fitness under control. And he's like, yeah, that's what a majority of these people want. And I'm like, man, maybe it's time to think about a group coaching program or a mastermind. And he's like, yeah, and he's like, yeah, I like that idea, but I don't know anything about it. And I'm like, I'm happy to mentor you on what it's all about. And I like, Chris, you totally could do this. And he's like, yeah, I guess I could. And then all of a sudden he started getting excited about it. And I said, here's what I want you to do. I want you to study this. I want you to study this. And I want you to, and guess what he does? He takes action. He studies it. And I said, hey, I want you to get this Tony Robbins program. And I want you to hear what I'm hearing on a weekly basis, or on a daily basis. And I want you to be inspired and motivated. And it's going to help pour into you. It's going to help you understand why you've achieved so much success in your life. And it's going to help you instantly see how you can pour into others who are in your mastermind group so that you can mentor and coach with the same level of effectiveness that I've been able to have recently. And he's like, dude, and guess what? He does it. He's already listened to Tony Robbins' Personal Power 2 all the way through once. He's already on day 11 of 30 for the second time around, he just told me yesterday. And so he takes action. And guess what? He launched his mastermind group, the Fitness Focus Mastermind. And he's already got his first 2 members. And he's like, okay. And we were talking, and well, guys, here's what I want to tell you. Chris Pavone is joining the Next Level Mastermind. He's going to be a part of the PM group of the Next Level Mastermind starting next week. And I am so super stoked. I can't even begin to tell you how awesome it makes me feel to know that he's come this far. And there, so why do I tell you all of these things? I tell you all of these things because Chris Pavone is the perfect example of somebody who does something worth talking about and is someone worth talking about. You see, Chris Pavone at this point, he could start paying for advertising if he wanted to. And as a result of creating quality content that consistently adds value every single, I will tell you, I gain amazing insight and amazing value from the Chris Pavone show every single week I listen. I am always encouraged. I am always inspired. I am always motivated. I always listen to Chris's show first. If his episode, if I look in the app and there's a new episode from him and anyone else, Chris always gets listened to first because there's that much value. So Chris, if he wanted to, he could start paying for advertising and he'd be able to allow that paid advertising to not be a waste of money because Chris Pavone has mastered the skill of being someone or doing something worth talking about. He adds value to people's life. He's creating content that's valuable. And if somebody discovers Chris, if they discover him as a person, if they discover his show, if they discover his products, if they discover his coaching, if they discover his fitness-focused mastermind, guess what? They will start talking. The best method of marketing is word of mouth. Awesome, positive word of mouth where every single person who mentions your name is always saying something awesome about you. That's the best way to advertise your business. And you know what? Because of that, Chris Pavone hasn't had a need to pay for advertising yet. Now, just like me, Chris Pavone may eventually get to a place where he has a product or service that it might make a lot of sense for him to pay for advertising. But I promise you, it will not be wasted money on paid advertising because Chris Pavone is someone and is always doing something worth talking about. And that's what I wanted to share with you today. And I also want to encourage you, if you haven't done so already, go subscribe to the Chris Pavone Show. And if you are, matter of fact, my coaching is $1,500 an hour, or you can buy a mentoring package for $3,500 for 3 one-hour calls. I can tell you right now, mentoring with Chris Pavone would be extremely valuable to you. And I can't remember what his hourly rate is right now. Let me see if it's on his website. I think you could do a 1 hour session for like $150 or something like that. I can't remember. Or no, whoa, 60. Okay, dude, Chris, we're gonna talk. So I'll tell you what. Do this. I bet you if you mentioned that you heard about it here on the Cliff Ravenscraft Show, you could still get this. Because if I just went to chrispavone.com. That's Chris with a K, Pavone, chrispavone.com. And you click on Work With Me, scroll all the way to the bottom. You can do a 60-minute one-on-one goal-setting strategy session for only $97. All right? Now, I'm going to encourage Chris to change that to $150. All right? We're gonna jump that up like immediately. And chances are he will do it, because Chris takes action on the things that he gets as feedback. But here's what I'm going to encourage him to do. And for as long as, let's just say for the entire year 2018, I would encourage Chris to offer this $97 rate for a one-on-one goal-setting strategy session. Work with Chris Pavone. Spend an hour being personally coached and mentored by Chris Pavone on how to achieve a goal that you have. Get to listen to his podcast. You'll understand after why I make such a huge fuss about him. But his rate will no longer be $97 for a 1 hour session. But I can assure you it'll change to $150. You'll see. But here's what I will tell you. If you reach out to Chris in the year 2018, I'm recording this on May 25th, 2018. Throughout the end of this year, I'm going to encourage Chris immediately to raise his rate to 150. It'll eventually be 300. It'll probably be 300 by the end of this year. Okay, but it's going to go to 150 immediately, more than likely, like 99.9% chance of happening. But all throughout 2018, if you say you heard about his goal-setting strategy 1 hour call on the Cliff Ravenscraft Show, episode number 548, I promise you, Chris will give you that $97 rate. All right, because that's what it currently is on his website. And also, if you are struggling with your health and fitness goals, and maybe you hire him for an hour, get to talk with him, see how that works. Maybe another hour here, and then check out his mastermind, his actual weekly mastermind group, which I believe is currently $197 per month. Now, mine's $1,000 per month, but his is $197 a month. And I already know the two people who are in his group, and they're both awesome people, and they have worked with Chris. They have met with Chris. They're inspired by Chris. They understand why I suggest people follow Chris, and they've like, dude, I went into your mastermind group, and for $197 a month to be in a weekly group for accountability and encouragement and motivation to stick with your goals with Chris Pavone in your life every week, it is a no-brainer. So I encourage you to go check out all those things. And then, of course, you can meet Chris at the Free the Dream conference. He's going to be at the Free the Dream conference. He actually has already purchased his VIP ticket for Free the Dream, and he was the first person who says, Cliff, dude, I know I bought a VIP ticket, but I also want to be available as a volunteer. I want to do anything and everything. It doesn't matter if it's in front of people, behind the scenes, dude, anything you want, I'm there. It's like, this guy is someone worth talking about. It's not just what he does, it's just who he is. Chris Pavone. Come meet him at the Free the Dream conference in Franklin, Tennessee. Come make your dream come true. What is it that you want to do next with your life? Are you living the life for which you are created? Are you living your dream? Now is the time. Now is the time to live the life that you were created for and to do the work you feel most called to do in this world. Come to Free the Dream, freethedream.live, and come meet Chris Pavone, one of my greatest friends on this planet. All right. Until next time, my friends, I encourage you to take every area of your life to the next level.